some days. 2 billion news articles with the word crisis in the article. It's kind of hard to feel cheery, sunny, happy, everything's wonderful, yay, right? 2 billion headlines. Crisis, 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 crisis. I want to explain why there's so much upheaval. And it's not just big social and political crisis as well, but there's all these personal crises that we have to deal with in our lives. Sometimes, like right now, we've all got sorts of personal crises going on and struggles, etc. But then there's just like even if we didn't just come through a pandemic, there wasn't a war on and all, just normal, there are crises that we face in our lives. Like, for example, the identity crisis, right? I like this one. This one made me laugh. Right? When you're having an identity crisis, we all go through an identity crisis of some kind, usually at some point, sometimes multiple times, but it's actually kind of a stage of development, right? And it's hard if you've ever parented a teenager, right? Because that kid gets to suddenly this person that you've known, this person you've known, suddenly goes through this period of like trying on identities. Sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's pretty extensive, and then sometimes there's kind of an identity crisis, and we've all gone through it. We've all gone through it. I'm really glad that I did not grow up in an age where everything I did and said as a teenager was digitally recorded for all time. I once did a dance routine in a lip sync competition to Vanilla Ice Ice Baby anyways. And I won. I had the entire dance routine memorized, and I did it. It probably wouldn't be as embarrassing. It wouldn't be as embarrassing if I had learned the dance routine for the lip sync competition. But the truth of the matter is, I didn't decide until the lip sync competition had started that I was going to do it. I borrowed some guy had this neon kind of tracksuit thing, like one of those parachute kind of things. This is back in the day. I borrowed that, and then I just happened to have the dance routine memorized. Yeah. So things have changed. Things have changed. I don't think I would do that now. My identity has shifted. Apparently, actually, there is a VHS recording. A friend of mine from high school has it and periodically blackmails me.
Why did you say that? Rob's watching you.
Good point. I did find a funny meme this week, though. Can you go to the next slide? I love this. Develops the term identity crisis named Eric Erickson. That's actually true. I think that's really funny that the guy's name was Eric Erickson, and he's like, I have an identity crisis. Is my first name or my last name? I don't know. Anyways, am I my own son? I don't understand. Anyways, kind of funny. But we've all experienced a crisis at some point in our lives, right? We've all gone through something hard. We've gone through something difficult. We've gone through a moment in our lives that I had to do something now or everything was going to change. This moment mattered. And sometimes in those crisis moments, you know you're in the moment. Sometimes you don't, right? Sometimes we look back and we're like, wow, if that hadn't happened, if I hadn't done those things, my life would be incredibly different, good or bad. But sometimes you know you are standing in a moment that is going to decide the rest of your life, what you decide in this moment. You know, the thing that's so unfortunate for a lot of youth is that some of those moments happen when you're teens. They happen when you don't even have all of the skill set necessary, but if you don't make the decision now, it's too late. That is a tough reality. Now, what's interesting about this idea of crisis is I looked it up, and sure enough, people research crises. There are people who've done PhDs, master's theses on this idea of crises, and they try to decide, okay, what does this actually mean? What do we mean when we say this? And there's actually a bit of a definition for what constitutes a crisis. And these are the three characteristics of a crisis. One is it's unexpected. It's not a crisis if you knew it was coming and you planned for it. Because then it's not a crisis, it's just a significant moment of some kind. So it's unexpected. Two, it creates uncertainty. And that's what I mean by sometimes you know you're in that moment because you know, the one thing you do know is that on the other side of this are a number of things that are going to happen, but I'm not sure how it's going to go. So it's unexpected, it creates uncertainty, and then probably one of the other realities is it's seen as a threat to current goals. For it to be a crisis, it's seen as a threat to what your current goals are, what your current trajectory is, what your plan for your life is. A crisis means that the stuff I hold dear, the direction I was planning, whatever it is, I might not be able to continue here. Something might have to change. Like, so for example, an identity crisis, a good example of that is like a kid who grew up on a farm, grew up his whole life farming, kind of planning on becoming a farmer. That's his whole world, his whole life. Dad sells the farm and they move into the city. Right? Who am I now? What do I do now? Am I going to keep being a farmer? Like, you see what I mean? So it's unexpected, creates uncertainty, and there's a threat to current goals, current reality. And the more I thought about it, I liked that definition. Like, it felt kind of weird, but then I started thinking about some of the crises in my life, and I was like, no, that works. I think that kind of works. I don't know. How do you feel about it? Anyways, this doesn't have anything to do with what we're going to be talking about today. I was just interested in it. Thought it would be fun. It's like, this would be kind of cool. You guys would really... No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, of course it does. But just hold on to that for a couple seconds. We're still in the book of John. We're going to talk about the Bible. It's okay. So hold all that stuff in your mind, just over there in this little side spot for a second. We're going to pick up our story from where Heather left off last week. So last week, Heather was talking about this time that Jesus heals a man who had been born blind. He had been blind from birth, and Jesus heals him and restores his sight, which should be a good thing. Unfortunately, he did it on the Sabbath day. You're not supposed to do any work on the Sabbath day, and the religious leaders felt like miraculously healing somebody's sight constituted work. And so they got into this huge big argument about, whether whether he sinned or his parents sinned. It was a whole thing. You can go watch Heather's message from last week if you want to, which was phenomenal on the concept. But then what happens is he gets brought before the religious leaders and they start grilling him. You would think everybody's all happy about, holy shit, the guy was blind and now he's not blind anymore. This is amazing. And instead they're like arguing about whether or not the guy sinned and he shouldn't sin, and whether Jesus should have healed him on the Sabbath. And at one point they start talking about Jesus being possessed by a demon. That must be it. Because we all know demons like to heal people's eyesight. And so they get mad at this guy because they start trying to get him to badmouth Jesus. They want to get him to badmouth Jesus. And one of the things I loved in the commentary I was reading is the guy keeps referring to this blind gentleman who is no longer blind, this ex-blind guy, as the truth teller. And he gives him the name truth teller. And so for the rest of this section of the commentary, instead of referring to him, because we don't know the guy's name, and instead of referring to him as the guy, former blind person, ex-blind guy, whatever, he keeps saying, so truth teller says to them, which I just thought was powerful, because the guy refuses to become a part of their world, and he also refuses to say anything about Jesus he doesn't know that's good. Like, he doesn't also decide, okay, I'm going to build this guy up. He just simply tells the truth. And he infuriates them to the point that they kick him out of the synagogue. And when it says that, what they mean is he's not like, hey, out you get. He has been excommunicated. He is no longer welcome to worship with them. He's been excommunicated, and his crime is getting his sight back by Jesus on the Sabbath. It's insanity. So that all happens. And this is where the story continues, and we're going to pick it up this week. In John chapter 9, verse 35. Jesus heard that they had expelled the man born blind. Finding him, Jesus said, do you believe in the human one? Do you believe in the Son of Man? It's this really interesting phrase, kind of a weird phrase. John doesn't use it very often. Do you believe in the human one, the Son of Man? And he answered, which I love again, truth teller, right? He answered, who is he, sir? I want to believe in him. Jesus said, you have seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking with you. The man said, Lord, I believe. And he worshiped Jesus. And Jesus said, I have come into the world to exercise judgment so that those who don't see can see, and those who see will become blind. Some Pharisees who were with him heard what he said and asked, surely we aren't born blind, are we? And Jesus said to them, if you were blind, you wouldn't have any sin. But now that you say we see, your sin remains. Well, how does This is such a badass moment of Jesus, quite honestly. Like, they know, the religious leaders know, right? I love how it says, what does it say? Some Pharisees who were with him heard him. No, I mean, they know what he's doing, right? And they're like, surely we aren't born blind. And Jesus is like, yeah, you definitely are blind. You definitely have no idea what's going on. Absolutely. But anyways, this is a really beautiful conclusion to the truth teller's story, right? This blind guy. He's been kicked out. What's beautiful is that the passage says Jesus comes to find him. And we go back to what I talked about on Easter. Jesus comes to find him. He comes looking for the man. Why? Because the guy doesn't know what Jesus looks like. That blew me away last week when Heather said that. I have been teaching all my life on these passages, not all my life, 25 years of being a pastor. And I was like, oh yeah, the guy was blind. And then he had to leave. And he didn't know, he never got a chance to see Jesus. Anyway, so the guy doesn't know what Jesus looks like. So Jesus comes and finds him. What's really kind of interesting is you can tell that the guy recognizes Jesus' voice. He's probably never going to forget Jesus' voice, right? So he recognizes Jesus' voice, and he understands what's going on a little bit. And as soon as he understands his voice, he's willing to follow him. When Jesus says, do you believe in the Son of Man? He says, well, I don't know who he is. Tell me who he is. I want to. I want to believe in him, right? It's a beautiful little passage. And the next line is amazing. Once Jesus says, look, the one who is speaking is the Son of Man. The next line is amazing. It says, the man said, Lord. It's the first time I think in John that the word Lord Kyrios is used. It's a very much, especially for John, it is only used of like Jesus as Lord, one master, like Son of God, one who must be obeyed. So I think it's just him and Thomas, in the scriptures, in the book of John, who say Lord. He says, Lord, I believe. And he worshiped Jesus. He's ready to trust Jesus no matter what. He's in. He's sold. He's good. Jesus gave him his sight back. That's all he needed. I'm going to follow this guy forever. And then he worships Jesus. Now the word here is the Greek word proskuneo. And there's three words in the New Testament that are translated into English as worship. And this word proskuneo is where we get the concept of prostration from. To lie on your face. The actual Greek means to lie on one's face and to kiss the feet. I can't think of a more worshipful attitude. I can't think of a more surrendered attitude to lay down on your face at the feet of somebody and kiss their feet, particularly in that time and place. It was incredibly powerful, an incredibly demonstrative moment. Can you imagine that? He's not in church. It's not this. It's not a weird thing that happens once a year when the priests come forward and prostrate themselves before the altar. They're in this town square. They're in the center. Jesus already spit and made mud. We know what's down there. It's an agrarian society. It's not dirt that they're walking on. It's from cows and sheep and chickens and all of that. And this man gets down on his face in front of Jesus in the middle of all of these people. And he worships Jesus. It's incredible. This guy gets who Jesus is, and he has decided that he is willing to bet everything on him. He's already lost his place in the synagogue and in society. And he decides, screw my dignity. Screw all of that. I don't care. I want to follow this guy here. It's beautiful. We could learn from this guy. Anyways, this isn't what I want to talk about this week either. What really got me this week, Jesus continues here. So the guy comes, he does all this. The guy says, I believe, I worships Jesus. And then Jesus continues, says, I have come into the world to exercise judgment, so those who don't see can see, and those who see will become blind. What's been bothering me this week is the word judgment. The word judgment has been driving me a little bit nuts because we're in the Gospel of John. And we have already gone past John chapter 3, verse 16 and 17, which most of us know fairly well. My goodness, almost the whole world knows John 3:16, right? And here's the problem, because John 3:16, 17 says, God so loved the world that he gave his only son, so that everyone who believes in him won't perish, but have eternal life. God didn't send his son into the world to judge the world, but that the world through him might be saved. And just a few chapters earlier, Jesus has explicitly said, I'm not here to judge the world. And then we run into this passage where he says, I'm here to exercise judgment. And so I was having a hard time with the incongruity. I was struggling because I don't understand why the change. I don't understand what's going on. And I was wrestling with what does this mean? I spent a bunch of time looking at the languages that are there. What is the root words, all this kind of stuff. Here's the thing. Here's what I got thinking about. We tend to think that Jesus popped out of Mary ready to go, right? We tend to think that Jesus pops out of Mary, little baby Jesus pops out, little 6 pounds, 7 ounces, and a little Talladega Nights for you there, right? He pops out of Jesus, out of Mary, not of Jesus, pops out of Mary, all ready to go, and he's like fully baked, not stoned. Like cooked, ready to go. Like he already knows everything. He's already got all the answers to everything. He's a baby, but he's like, he might as well have the beard, long hair, blonde hair, blue eyes, all that kind of stuff already, which probably would have freaked out his Middle Eastern Arabic parents. But anyways, so he pops out, all that happens, but the problem is he doesn't. We know he learns. We know that he has to learn. We know that he grows physically. So Jesus learns. Jesus did not have this fully downloaded concept of who he is. He's learning. He understands that he's God's son. We know he understands that from early on. Remember when he gets found in the temple, for those of you who know that story. And he says, why wouldn't I be in my father's house? He already understands that God is his father. He understands he has this calling, this vocation. But what we notice through the Gospels is a shift in how Jesus thinks. For example, Jesus begins to understand his divinity. And you can kind of tell because at the beginning of his ministry, he's sort of using these like, I and the Father are one, I do what the Father says, and there are these I am statements in John that start to get more explicit. And he starts out sort of hinting at divinity, and by the end, they want to kill him. That's what they're going to crucify him for in the end, is he flat out says, I am, right? Before Abraham was, I am. Bang, that's it, it's time to go. And so what I started thinking about, what if Jesus is learning here? What if this is an example of Jesus beginning to understand something? So earlier he says the Father didn't send the Son into the world to condemn the world, to judge the world, right? So he understands that, but here he uses this word judgment. And Frederick Bruner says this, which I thought was kind of fascinating. He says it's almost as if experiences like this one, what's happened with this guy and with the religious leaders, are actually teaching Jesus something about himself and about how his ministry works in the world. And this is what I found really fascinating. So what if we look at it like this? It's not that Jesus is the one who is supposed to be doing the judging. So when we hear the word, I have come to judge, we think about like, okay, the judge sits up there, he's got his gavel, boom, you are guilty, bang. What if it's not that? What if it's not that he's talking about? What if Jesus' presence all by itself enacts judgment? Because his ministry almost seems to unintentionally enact judgment. When Jesus comes into a situation like this and he's a part of it, well, what happens? The sheep and the goats, they get separated. The believer and the unbeliever gets separated. The blind and the sighted, they get divided. And Jesus is then at the center of it, enacting judgment. I think there might be something to this reality. I mean, look at even today how people respond to Jesus' teaching. It's divisive. His teaching is divisive. It is, this is how life was created to live, or this is not how life was created to live. You can't kind of halfway it. Either you want to follow Jesus or you want to follow after the world around us. You want to follow Jesus or you want to follow after Christianity. You want to follow Jesus or you have to make this kind of choice. And we see that already happening. We see that often happen with Jesus, where there's these divisions that take place. And Jesus hints at it when he says he's come, right, to put father against son, and these kinds of things. He knows that when he speaks, this is going to happen. And there's a sense in this moment he's beginning to realize this. That's still not really what I was struck by this week, though. What really got me is I got stuck on some of the ancient language. I got stuck on some of the Greek here. And something kind of hit me that I think is really fascinating. I know, so many twists and turns, can't keep up. Here's the thing. The Greek word for the word judgment in this verse here is the Greek word krima. And a root word for krima is the Greek word krisis. Now, probably figured it out now because I spent the beginning of this talking about crisis, and it is where we get the English word crisis from, this Greek word krisis. And what blew me away is there's this kind of weird thing going on. There's this weird thing happening where judgment and crisis can now be, like, what if they were synonymous? What does that mean? And so think about what's going on with this blind guy. This is what Jesus has done by restoring sight to this blind man on the Sabbath day. Jesus precipitates a crisis, a judgment. Now, but think about the tension between these two words all week, this tension between crisis and judgment. Okay, let's go back. We'll review what are the three things that make up a crisis, right? A crisis needs to be unexpected. A crisis needs to create uncertainty. And a crisis needs to be a threat to previously held goals or ideas. So think about Jesus. Think about this situation. Jesus has come into this situation. So is he unexpected? Holy crap, yeah, of course he's unexpected. They were waiting for a Messiah. 100% they were waiting for a Messiah, but not like Jesus. That sermon has been preached to death, but Jesus did not fit any of their preconceived notions. He is entirely unexpected. The Messiah would never come in and violate Sabbath. Oh my goodness. So he's entirely unexpected. So with that one, it works. What about the next one? He is definitely creating uncertainty with everybody. Because even the people who love him, even his disciples haven't got a freaking clue what's going on. And half the time they're like, he can't seriously be doing this. They come across him with the woman at the well, and they're like, Jesus, you can't be here talking to her. What the heck? Right? Famously, Mary Magdalene comes in, and she's like kissing his feet and pouring perfume all over his feet. And they're like, oh, we're in trouble now. There are so many times the disciples have this kind of vibe going on, right? Because he creates uncertainty everywhere he goes. No one is sure what he's going to do or how the crowd will react, and he is a threat to everyone. And this is what really struck me this week. Jesus is a threat to you. If you don't understand that Jesus is a threat to you, you are not paying attention. He is a threat to everything we hold dear in our society. Now, at this particular place in time, he is 100% a threat to the religious leaders of this day. He is a threat to everything that they believed in their entire system, their entire structure. He is a threat to the safety of the Israelite people because he's getting everybody riled up and Rome could come in and can crush them at any moment. He is a threat to the religious leaders because they like their neat little system. They love how they've got this neat little relationship with Rome, and so they get all this power, and all they have to do is support, this particular leader in this particular political party. And if they kind of just buy into all that, BS that's going on, and they give lip service to them, then they get to have all this power. Thankfully, that doesn't happen anymore, right? So they've got all this, and then on top of it, he's a threat to their money because that's where their money comes from. And Jesus is going to blow this whole thing up. But here's what I want us to understand. He is a threat to the blind man too. See, the blind guy has already had a life. He's had a life, and he had a very particular role in society. He's an outcast. All he can do is beg. That's his role. That's his life. But now he can see. And so now he has all sorts of choices to make about what's next in his life. And Jesus has already been a threat because he's been excommunicated for just simply telling us the truth. Do you see? This guy had to make a choice, and Jesus was a threat. Everybody in this story now has to decide. They're being judged. Crisis. The question is, what are they going to do in the middle of this crisis? What are they going to do now? What choice are they going to make now? Are they going to follow Jesus, not follow Jesus? Are they going to choose to receive sight and actually understand how the world works because that's what Jesus is doing? Or are they going to stay blind? What are they going to choose? The blind man has made his choice pretty clear. He has chosen Jesus hands down, 100%. He's chosen Jesus face down, right? You know what's really cool, by the way, just as a little side note? When the religious leaders are taking shots at this guy, and they don't believe his story, and they're all upset, they're like, how dare you? You should say, like, put this man aside, cast him down. You should denounce this man, and you should give glory to God. And so the irony is that this guy did exactly what they asked him to do. They kicked him out, and he went out, and he gave glory to God. It's what he ends up doing. He's made his choice. In a sense, he has received judgment. Crisis. The religious leaders are judged as well. They experienced the same crisis, and they made their choice. Some who were with him heard what he said and asked, surely we aren't blind, are we? And Jesus said to them, if you were blind, you wouldn't have any sin, but now that you say we see, your sin remains. With all this talk of the blind man seeing, it's hard not to remember that it was just a chapter ago that Jesus is calling himself the light of the world. Imagine this light coming into the world as crisis, as judgment. That's what light does. It comes in and it exposes. When light shines into darkness, it exposes, and the brighter that light, the more you can see, and all those dark corners get suddenly exposed. When I was at camp growing up, my parents were kids camp directors, and when I became a teenager, one of the coolest things was when I would get to move out into my own cabin, and I didn't have to stay in my parents' cabin anymore. But when I was pretty young, I was like 10, 11 when they let me do this, and so I used to have to do cabin cleanup in my own cabin, even though I wasn't like a camper, because my mom basically wanted to make sure that like my room did not become a disgusting mess. And I quickly realized that you should not, we used to turn off the generator. Don't clean your cabin by oil lamp at night if mom is going to come and take a look at it the next morning when the generator is on and there's lights that you can turn on, right? Because what looks clean by an oil lamp looks really dirty by the bright light of electric lights. There's a bit of that with what Jesus is doing. Saving power of Jesus becomes active in bringing this light and life to anywhere responsible. It's available to all. But it exposes and judges those who reject the light, those who prefer darkness, those who prefer to remain blind. Who prefer to ignore what is right in front of them. I think this is the thing that I find the hardest about this. Jesus has done this. It's right in front of them. Like it's right there. There's a guy who in the morning could not see, and then standing in front of them is looking at them because he can see them. And they're like, yeah, no. And I used to believe that was ridiculous. I got to be honest, over the last couple of years, I'm not convinced of that. I watched as the evangelical church has absolutely lost sight of what is going on, what Jesus cares about, what Jesus is about, and has decided to choose darkness, decided to prefer to stay blind. This writer, George Beasley, says it like this in sort of fancy old language. He says, the light, by its shining, accordingly creates judgment. In the very act of bringing salvation into the world, it divides the world. The man who never chose to be blind receives his sight, and those born with sight choose to be blind. You know, we're living in a crisis right now. We're living in a crisis right now. The church is living in a crisis right now. And it's struggling because it's not sure how we're going to respond. Fox is living in a crisis right now. And we're not alone. So many churches seeing people walk out the doors and not come back. That might be okay. Because with the crisis for the church right now as a whole is, what are we going to be about? What are we about? What matters? Is all this stuff, all the trappings, all the things that we've created over time that we call church, that we call religion, we call Christianity, does this stuff matter? What matters? What does Jesus matter? Is what Jesus taught us, is how he leads us, is where he's taking us, is that what matters? The church is in a crisis. You know, the word crisis first showed up in the English language in a medical sense. The first time it shows up in any kind of English literature, it's used to talk about the moment where a disease in somebody's body is either going to move towards recovery or towards death. That's crisis. The reality is that's where we're always at when it comes to Jesus. Towards life or towards death. I don't mean that we go to hell when we die. We get to fly up and go to heaven when we die. I mean right now in this moment, to live in a way that is life-giving, which is what Jesus taught us, or to live in a way that is soul-crushing and soul-defeating. That's the crisis that we're all facing right now. And the world needs us to respond, quite frankly. The world needs us to respond like this blind guy did. I just about really swore there. The world needs us to say, screw it. I don't really care what everybody else thinks about me. I don't care about all this other crap. I'm choosing Jesus. He's the only one who seems to have any friggin' idea what's going on. That's where I'm going, right there. He's the only one who can see. He's the only one not stumbling around. He's the only one that makes any sense. He's the only one that's got any words of life. And this other stuff is just killing us. So I'm choosing that. And then I'm going to do for the people around me what he has done for me. And I'm going to share light. And I'm going to share life. And I'm not ripping people down. And I'm not getting into arguments about whether you're born sinful or not born sinful. It's not the point. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about this other way of seeing the world around me. Last worship team, come on up. When I was, the first church I was at, I had a friend named Dave who was a blind guy. And Dave was an absolute riot. He was a nutcase. Dave used to love doing jokes like you'd walk in the room and he'd be reading the newspaper upside down, things like that. And we went on a trip to Washington together. We went sightseeing together, which for Dave was less than exciting, as you can imagine. Sightseeing was not a whole lot of fun for Dave. But what I found fascinating about it was, unfortunately for Dave, it might have been one of the worst trips of Dave's life, but it was a phenomenal trip for me because I had to spend the whole trip describing what we saw to Dave. Because he can't see it. And so I would describe what the Capitol buildings looked like and describe what the Washington Monument looked like and describe all of these things. And we went to the Canadian Embassy where apparently we had a lot of money at that time to spend on art. And there was all these statues out in front of the Canadian Embassy. And I described what they all looked like. And because I was in the process of having to describe everything to Dave, who was blind, I was present in all those moments in a way I don't think I ever would have been if I hadn't had to do that. I couldn't take for granted just seeing it, right? That's the privilege that we get when we choose Jesus. The privilege we get is that we begin to describe to the people around us what life could be like. To describe what it could be like to live in the kingdom as God intends. So what are you going to choose? Let's pray.